Tene tatanda Juni Pardugi Yokla, tatanda tu lazo don, hill lazo, Tanjarji patatende, Sumarella, Tene te tatanda Naranso Mohi Pichetola, Tanyam Ninja Gasola, Zo, Tahitu lazo, Jal, Tene tatanda. Kasing kontu hiba yendola daji je yiram cha la gam tene te yendo tu la zo gam tene hewe la zo gam tene ta te tab la ya tanda jitang yal tanda kundra la zo ban yal ta tende she na jerdo yiram cha la ngo hiba tang tene di kapsala tuno mechewa la zo pe goba yuarela tene te yendo iram jalla gombe kapsula ya tene chitang ta tanda salwa iram jalla gombe tene seni namba samsung rela tene te ya salwa temba takpa temba samsung te la tene jerem je la namba salwa te 다 디 랍도 좀나 차창다고 대답을 마중나요 라리리 견들라 되네 코퍼라서 반잘네 되네 된조 군도 찬세 제 차루 라서 바탄지 만디바 랍도 좀나 제름증은 살답도 봐 대답을 마중나요 다 대답이지 요래 somne 하고도 봐제 양니 양도 검니 다 되지 라이 넘버 검바텔라 사차이에 바텔라 제렘 살와 숭기요 되네 다 되지솔랑 나절 템바레라 되네 나절 템바 세두 되네 지탕게 당가란소가 라검바 갑슬라 제 당가랑 운이 때 말이대 이나요 제 인somni 검바 인som반다보게 넘또 당가란소 토마 메바니 마다발라 검바 온기 되니 대답을 노 샤르게라 대답을 마인바 다단다 다바 이람절라조 된조 나랑게 루지낭도 단당 응어서 요요 삼바 대답을 검네 되니 양니 양도 아티니 텔라 ngajar tempa sedu iram jalla tenso unsu yo hiwaji tsani ton barwa tong ngacho ton tabaren zen la so tenso yo ngaraya doji sembe ko nguyen sambatabo teni te ya tang ngu main pala yen sam de pandabo main pa tang ngune ge nelu go on de sena ya teni ta deorhi bi nimbu ngo tabo ti yimbata tene tegendo tanda number hiba tsuji number tapate hiwaji chutani ngo yimbata doji nga chutati yongsu tapate to tongtong to lazo yimbe cherna tene te tabu ngusu yepala yeparsal tabayin yepala yeparsambayin sombege daindra boje yepasi ne ta tele ichi tempo yabate ngajal tempa segrela tene takwa tempa sedu jay rimola ti yapandabo jay sala je yapandabo tene tetabu jay pembuga nambandabo maimpa tene te tanda takwa yichirangzu imbala tene tetabu yin samne tene te tato gambate jerem seni tamba imbicherna
During the interval of Dharmata, you see the wrathful and the peaceful deities. And it is in order to be able to recognize them at that time that we practice the self-visualization of the peaceful and wrathful ones. In addition, you can do other things to help facilitate recognition, such as familiarizing yourself with their appearance as depicted in paintings or statues. The point in either case is that you gain the ability to recognize these deities, as yidams, and by doing so avoid the bewilderment that will otherwise ensue from encountering them. In the practice of the self-visualization or any deity visualization practice, there are said to be 3 characteristics that must be... This isn't really working well. I normally hear more. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
You really? Okay. It doesn't sound quite right to me. Okay. Still okay?
Yeah.
All right. In the practice of the self-visualization or in any deity visualization practice, there are said to be 3 characteristics which must be present. And these are called clear appearance, stable pride, and recollection of purity. Clear appearance means to generate as much as possible a clear appearance in the visualization of the deities being visualized. Now, at best, this obviously means a completely clear visualization of each and every one of the deities. But if not, one should at least attempt to learn the appearances of the deities, their colors, postures, costumes, scepters, and so forth, well enough that you can generate a fairly clear image of any one of them, one by one at a time. If that is too much, then at the very least you should learn the appearance of the deities, so that although you may not be able to visualize them, you know how the deities appear, and therefore can at least generate the idea they are present as they appear. In any case, the actual clarity of the visualization, the clarity of the image, is clear appearance. The second characteristic of the generation stage is stable pride. It's possible that when we perform a visualization practice, visualizing ourselves as a deity, we might think, well, I'm not really this deity, but I'm going to meditate on myself as that deity. This is an incorrect outlook. And it's not surprising that we should have such an outlook, because it's a result of our beginningless habit of self-fixation. Nevertheless, it's important to recollect the fact that you are not pretending to be someone or something other than what you already are when you visualize yourself as a deity. With regard to the visualization of the peaceful and wrathful deities within your body, you do so in recollection of the fact that these deities, whether visualized or not, are already present within your body. The peaceful deities, the wrathful deities, and the pure Vidyadharas already exist within your body. With regard to the visualization of yourself as Vajrasattva, Vajrasattva is the embodiment of Buddha nature, which is and always has been your true nature. So whether you think of it as the visualization of yourself as the embodiment of your own true nature, Buddha nature, or the embodiment of the pure nature of your 8 consciousnesses as the peaceful deities, of the 51 mental formations as the wrathful deities, in any case, you should generate the confidence and trust that in visualizing yourself as these deities, you are acknowledging your true nature and not pretending to be other than you are. The third characteristic of the generation stage is called the recollection of purity. And the recollection of purity is the recollection of the fact that the image of the deity is not something substantial and lifeless, like a flat, 2-dimensional painting or a 3-dimensional but solid statue. It is utterly insubstantial, and yet at the same time, the vivid appearance of wisdom itself appearing in the form of that deity. So the practice, the incorporation of these 3 characteristics, clear appearance, stable pride, and recollection of purity, is important to the practice of the generation stage.
Tene ta te tabula savna yapochong, nyamne yapochong na ta tanda denchu jili song yore song nandana lundin na yore la nan Europa nam poe tse ta te nyamne yapochi chong na nan Europa chiwe kapso Trontung la su nan jor me to na su la na to tene Trontung tu la su tan jek su rong te nam ya ta rangi gombe yidam ja la yin bal ngo hi te ya ran na number top ngo yin bal ngo hi na tene tu la su te tong chi chi chong me to na su la na to jan sen pa din na su tong run mu da na su ji tene jansen tong padin tong rumu dada kiwa hiza nam to te kachi ne se tbarse se tene ta tangbo hinkam la so pa ta kiwa zang bu ge ne so yedam ja la so te nam ji su ne tene ta te ta bo je to ba yung re so la ta te nyam ne ya bo ji chong na tene yung yo re tene te ya tanda jitang ge ngarang chu ge nyam ne je pa ta tene tate nyamne te pardu ge kapla cher thup mutup te ta cho mulam la ta gore sumare la tene tate ya mulam je no ata pardu no ani bote che phasir dabo daji yuwa imbe cherna tene ta pardu ge no ate yo sendala kase kam kase tene nyong yo na tela tene pardola tencha yung bi warela pe te yendo mlong la yin na ya nimo san la ten hi tong po ye ya po ji yo nan simi mlong ten te tar to ye pa che da nimo po cha zang bo che yo na tene te la semo yung mlong ya po da bo par che wa te mi ge yo da tene nimo te nom to ngem ba tene san la nom to ngem ba tan ji to tan tene yi me de wa tan tene chodo dong nga jalla so pe on de horna tene mulam je ka sala mulam ya po me ba la so pe yung ge yore rela mulam kap ka la khahi ta maung pe pha cha te mulam te kap ka la maung pe number da mulam ga na de yung ge yore la te yung jun sin de kan de je se na ta ngara so chen di ge no wa te yo ta le so pe ka pha cha la te ne yung ge yore la 바창 huma se yung imbe chena tene ta sani nani dawa jimala unjuge ta je drebu zangbu ina yanda je ngemba ina yanda ta te kaw kala mulanga nong de char cham phasher tende insare ba song ba ta tende yung ge yore ti junsin de country re chena ta ti bacha de se yung ga ta nda bo je la rela tini te kahi malam tipo yung gare te yung agi junsin te khande re sena ti pacha te se yung ga top nda bo re teacher na ta ti ge nimo tanda semten hi to poi ya po ji chone malam te sain ne tini malam je ngo te rangin me ba sen je tunong zam yin ba ngo tong ba yin ba te yapoji ngui sai ne ta te ngarang la ngi hi ji hlawa ye ba yin bich na te dongbu mulam yin ba la hi ba mulam te juma ta ba yin ba turba yin ba te ne ranghi ma du ba te ne ngarang su takpa te mada pa te takpa la jur hlawa te ne te la pacha zangbo sa ji ye ba tene pen mulam je ka sala yidam jala kerem gom na tene tombo ngarang semti ludi ta mulam je ka sala mada per lu yore te yena ya te takwa la jur na ya jur tup na kamcha yo na te juriya ye pan rabo je ta tene te yendola te ge mulam je noa ngemba yo na zangbo la juya ye pan rabo je ta jikra tong che ba yena jikra me ba la juriya ye pan rabo mulam te tombo mulam zungwa ta, tene malam jangba ta, tene malam jurwa la soba ta tenzo yinbe cher na te yapo che jang ju yore te jang na te la kam ju yore te kamba la tene ta sen la ten hi tenpa ta sen chi ten gamba la tene mahompa la pardu ne kam la yo malam je te tong pachir so dawa che chunhong hyargi yore. Chunhong hyargi kasolan chunhong din chunhong yinbalang ngohi ba. Chunhong din chunhong yinbalang ngohi ni dine maraba nong chunhong dong jikra la soba dinzu jurju yaba. De takpa la jurju yaba la soba yinba cherna. Dine mulam che chunhong de la dine dangu yore. Ni te ya tanda ta ngama ga tuto chimbo nam ji ngurga nam song yo re la dong mongom ni jin chulu ji song par dorun jong ba ka mon che so ta mongom la pe chur ni tini za ni ngue ma sin tini te kan ya zo ya me pa nda bo ta tin tin chur ba tin do yo na par do la ti ka le ka bo da bo yung sa do tin de song yo re la tini te me yo che do yo ni yo do kam yo ni yo do dang tende siena tene tel tene pemba yung yo la tene junsin teacher na ta tanda ngaranso desi dang kom idam jalla gom tende siena pe pento chimbo yung yo re.
With regard to the result of practicing such a generation stage endowed with these three characteristics, in the Chakrasambhara Tantra it says, when the yogin dies, he will be welcomed by the Herukas and yoginis, holding various flowers, banners, and playing musical instruments. For such a person, death is merely a concept. It is really the achievement of the celestial state, which in this case means an excellent rebirth. It also mentions at this point in the text that one can determine one's ability to achieve recognition and liberation in the Bardo by examining one's abilities in the dream state. Like dreams, the more you prepare the habit of recognition and of an outlook of purity and so forth in this life, the more likely you are to be able to recognize the Bardo and to be able to transform the appearances and hallucinations which occur within it. In the case of dreams, we notice that the state of mind and the resultant appearances of the dream state often correspond very closely to our state of mind and activities during the day. Whatever you think and do throughout the day will be to some extent reflected in your dreams. If you spend your day in a state of sadness or anxiety or kleshas such as jealousy and so forth, then these things will very much color the mind state and appearances of your dreams. Dreams also are an indication of our state of mind in a more general sense, such as the emergence of karmic imprints as active results. For example, sometimes we'll dream of something and then in a few days or as much as a month, it will actually happen. The reason why we occasionally have these glimpses of future events is that the karmic habits and imprints that are going to produce those events have actually become activated or have awoken. And therefore, we experience that activation as a dream that appears to be a kind of prediction of the future. Now, with regard to using the dream state in preparation for the Bardo, it is important to cultivate the skill of lucid dreaming, of recognizing that you are dreaming while dreaming, and the resultant skill in the transformation of the dream process. If throughout the day you maintain strong mindfulness, alertness, and circumspection, and the momentum of the motivation to recognize the dream state, then at night you can recognize it. In other words, you can have lucid dreams where you know you're dreaming. Having done that, if you look at the appearances of the dream, it is easy to see their unreality. So the first step is to recognize that you're dreaming. And the second step is to look at the dream appearances and observe their illusory nature, the fact that they are bewildered projections, that they are unreal. Further, having trained in the recognition not only of dreaming, but of the quality of the dream appearances, you should train in the transformation of those appearances. Transform the impure, ordinary dream appearances into the pure appearances of yourself as the Yidam deity, the surroundings as the Yidam's environment, and so on. In that way, you can accrue a very powerful habit of transformation and of viewing yourself as the deity. In dreams, because of the nature of dream appearances, provided that the dream is a lucid one, where you know you're dreaming, and provided that you have engaged in some degree of training the dream process through coming to recognize or observe its unreality, you can actually succeed in transforming the appearance of yourself, which will probably initially be an ordinary one, into the appearance of the deity. You can likewise transform negative dreams into positive ones, dreams full of danger or fear into pleasant ones, and so forth. So the stages of working with the dream state in preparation for the Bardo begin with cultivating lucid dreaming, and then training the dream state, which means coming to recognize the unreality of the appearances, and then transforming the appearances of the dream state. This can be done, and by doing it, you can cultivate a very strong habit of recognition and transformation that will be very beneficial in the interval or Bardo after death. Because the hallucinations and appearances which arise in the later parts of the interval or Bardo are appearances very much like the bewildered appearances of the dream state. And if you can recognize them as nothing more than your own bewildered projections, then you will know, based upon your experience of the dream state, that you can transform them, and you will do so. There is a saying, judging by my bewilderment in last night's dream, I can infer that I'm going to have a hard time in the Bardo tomorrow. If we remain without any control over recognition and transformation of the dream state, we cannot really expect to have the abilities of recognition and transformation of the Bardo appearances either. So therefore there is great benefit in cultivating the training within the dream state as there is in the practice of the generation stage of the Yidam in general.
Tene ta te tardo chuni bardo de la cerdo chuni tenju esar khaju jeta Yidam khitu la so charju number ni ba de rmayendo ta tandang ran so tanda caps study karisi go gresena ta chuni ye esar khawa ting musim bisedo la zorem gambata Tene Yidam khitu la so charwe kap tinala pembe ke chedola jerem gambate ta de karchegre la ta de kasi tutu je nyamne ji si tupna ta de be kalbasang pore tene hajang ke zendu chimboje ji madumna ta de je de la kamna ta de ge gaduina ya ta be chepartam phapaje nyamne ji tupna da pend de ina ya de zam nyamne ji madumna yo ta tu zum nyamne ji zam se na ya de kongsa phalba yen da mandawa ge bento chimbo yungri yo re la ta de ge chuni bardo de tubare ta yeba de spaleji bardo se ge yo re la spaleji bardo sinke de ta chitang ta tangbo ta ngaranzo kondo yuba yendo dene ta chichin tenzo ramba yendo lo sone ten chuni bardo la ror topna ange tangbo de yendo Yidam ja la so tangji ngo hiena jepartam papa re la tene ta de tabu la de tabu kap samajung na yo ta ngaranzo kondo po dangwa tembare po dangwa tenzo langling tar topna ya de jepartam papa re Tene taati ngaranzo te lamro hido mepa che chuni bardo la yapo majungwa che te tsam romato pa che tene ta tanda hitu la zon chawe kapsa la te tsam ngui mazin pa che Poa Gamba Kapsala and Poa de Nathan Baje, Yang Tabaje, Majuma Chena, Tati Kapla, Teni Yarti down the Sapapatu no de Young la. Teni Tati Kasala, Pocha Trubati, Tat Rang Trunote, Ya Long Yorella. Teni Tati Truba Pocha Lang ni. Tati ni mai kiwa chimi ngal tu machi ka parte la ta sapa parto segi yore tati parta tela sapa parto segi yore la teni te ya ta tanda konza tamalpa dangwan me teni leji drban hyukje teni po menga la soban songjor yapo majong ta tende i jonga jeda Poa Kahi Tabnaya, Tati Country Hiramebongi, Yapojin, poor Matoba, Teni, Tati Tabuji, Shone, Teni, Tati Captanala, Tachitang, Sipapatu no Harong Yore. Sipapatu no Harion Capsula, Tangbo, Narang Chorwala, Karium Senate, Jalson, no Bandaboji Har, Tati Kasuchuni, Neluji, London, Neparete, in a thing one mahipaltini, Jalson, no Bandaboji Har, Tinite Jalson, ne, Tene, Tati, no he late long young, pong to tell, Tini number hipateta, Luigi Chelatane, Tene, Tati, onki. Teni tangbo ta timrem tenzo remji yar seni. Teni ta kusum topi king tenzo yung ngoma he, lunduk noma tenzo yung ngoma he. Teni ta jay ngaransu thoma mepa ni kamba pacha ka onki, nroa ritu kuntuno tela tesi henjin cho yapa che. Ti hen cho te cherun nroa nrapo che ne. Teni ta tangbo par chiwe kapsala ranghin jeju topa te ngare. Ranghin jeju topa te ngare te. Ina ya ranghin jeju topa te nga songa te ya si ne. Teni wesar je namba te ngoma hipa la ngoma hipa ka tola teni. Teni marikpa te ya tombo 다 드랑히 제주 토박나니 지마 마리파 가파레라 마리파디 야 다니 테니 마리파다 테니 데자다 헤다다 테니 잡지 레지롱 디 야라 레지롱 세두다지 본주른다 보제 다 테니 레지롱나 테니 롱글롱 테니 메일롱 테니 초일롱 테니 다디 사일롱 남 소니 코로반두지 지남 히테니 코로게 촌농가 남 히테 살보 라보지 정네 테니 다디게 온기 테니 라히제 주토바데 차차 제 야라 테니 다데라 땅아랑게 루딩 무마데 도르사와레 단중아 나이 드릉게 온게 바도아레데 이나용 콩나이 롱동 남히니 성든드르벤 토레 이질루 다디게 롱아 데 단중아 데 무스 단다 사주면은 건 중앙아이 남힌다고 남 중앙한다고 요 말에데 중앙아이 롱다고지 레지 롱게 드니 드니 나랑게 넘버 히바데 대단 린제도 이질루 다 바두게 루제 두게 오래라 바두게 루지 넘버제 노 샤르게 오래 바두게 루데 다 단다 노탐지 지 공바다르시나 온보건송 토미 게 레지던 주효동 대성 요래라 드니 대센달라 로아인 바다보제다 엠바인 바다보제다 냠바인 바다보다 든데 이나야 드니 대 마인바 다디 바두고 온보텔라 드니 메긴 통 나웨투 온보가인 총아 온보차자 예바 드니 다데라 랑노알라 다 레지 온게 든데 지샤르게 요레 드니 레 룰라웨 종지 담바 룰라웨 데지 예반다고 제다 tene leji zontul hyudong din sungi warela leji zontul tong tempa leji ongi jay kana ina yung roto pandabu jay kana ina yung tene sharto pandabu jay leji zontul tong tempa ta di tingin zenji top dabu kanya mare kora leji number mambala tene ta di semchangba dabu jay ri sunti kana ina yung nangdo de jo undu tena jo rugu yo pandabu jay tene leji zontul tige dorji thola thopa member jo sedu tene tor dabu je ina khop ni jo no kin dabu ta ngaran so la gal yona kor ni do dabu je yona yana e ni kor yana te ni pa jarni rogu ge yore te ina ya ta pardu ge ne kala ko hi jilu ri sunden pa char tan do kin dabu je yung ge yore la ta te la leji ongi kande yung ge yore se na mai ngalte tene putuyo mare korata leji ongitana ne ndo imbicherna tene rotuyo mare la tene teacher na data buge leji zontuji shudong temba tene ngehi ya te chite si ya ba ndo ji chabe
mai nga sene ma chima genga
o
tene yang ka de ju data de chini bada ge jok de la jalgidoa jalsane tene de ya lar sepe kaso de namshi lune tempa ke kap derebe
la le
derangane to
ta te no hilune tempa poina koran te kan ro
sangamane
ta poa londo medu tene ta kani ina leji ong tan ro
la so de chini bada ge jok sepe bada ge gode
tene zonto.
So we've seen that the Bardo of Dharmata had a kind of two phases or two aspects. The first of which was the arising or appearance of the ground or ultimate clear light. And the second was the ensuing appearances of the display of the ground in the form of the peaceful and wrathful deities and so forth. Briefly put, the preparation for these two phases is the completion stage and the generation stage, respectively. Preparation in the practice of the completion stage enables one to achieve liberation in the first part of the Bardo of Dharmata, and practice of the generation stage enables one to achieve recognition and a pure rebirth in the second part of it. So therefore, we should practice both of these as much as possible. But even if you cannot practice these with tremendous exertion, simply to hear about the stages of the interval and simply to carry an understanding of these things is going to put you in a much better position than an ordinary person, which in this case means someone who has never heard of these things and who has no idea whatsoever what is going to happen after their death. So with that, we complete the third of the four intervals, and the third interval was the interval of Dharmata. Now we come to the fourth one, which is the rest of the period in between lives. It is called the karmic interval of becoming, and it lasts from the end of the interval of Dharmata until you enter the womb of your next mother. Now, if someone achieves liberation during the Bardo of Dharmata, either through the performance by themselves or another of the ejection of consciousness at the beginning of it, or the recognition of the ground clear light, the Dharmata itself, during it, or the achievement of pure birth through the recognition of the peaceful and wrathful deities as yidams. If someone achieves these things, they will not wander through the Bardo of becoming in the same way as an ordinary person. But if none of these three things is achieved, if either the ejection of consciousness is not performed by or for the person at all, or if performed is unsuccessful, If, in addition to that, the person does not recognize the ground clear light, the Dharmata, nor do they recognize the peaceful and wrathful deities, then they move on to this last phase of the interval. And this interval, the interval of becoming, is characterized by the re-arising in full strength of the habits of bewilderment, but without one's having a physical body. It lasts from the end of the Bardo of Dharmata until you enter your subsequent womb. Now, someone who has no instruction to enable them to achieve liberation, who has a lot of negative karma and so on, and has not been liberated in the preceding bardos, is going to experience the interval of becoming in the following way. First of all, if you don't achieve recognition and liberation at any point in the Bardo of Dharmata, then at its conclusion, after the 9 dissolutions are completed, you lose consciousness. You lose consciousness, and then when you awaken, you awaken because your consciousness is stirred by karmic wind. And the karmic wind is what is going to carry you out of the preceding body and into the following one. Now, in spite of the length of time it has taken to describe these first 2 bardos, unless the ejection of consciousness has been successfully performed, while the person is dead, their mind is no longer biologically seated in, or we would say plugged into, their body. Their consciousness does not leave the body until this point. So at this point, what happens is the karmic wind wakes the consciousness back up. And first of all, your consciousness leaves the body. Now, up to this point, the stages of dying and death that you've undergone included all of those dissolutions, the 9 dissolutions, included seeing, but if you get to this point, not recognizing the realms of the 3 kayas, not recognizing the appearances of spontaneous presence. We have obviously more familiarity with and more attachment to the appearances of the 6 states of samsara. So when, in the absence of a recognition of dharmata or of the spontaneous presence, which is the display of dharmata, consciousness re-arises, it will re-arise in an impure mode of appearance. You'll remember that during the bardo of the time of death, the 80 types of thoughts gradually were shut down. Now, with the karmic wind shaking the consciousness and driving it out of the body, these are going to be turned back on or reactivated. And this happens because the person did not recognize the ground clear light or its display. The absence of the recognition of the ground clear light and its display, which make up the 2 parts of the Bardo of Dharmata, is ignorance. So ignorance reasserts itself as a state of active bewilderment when you regain consciousness. That is the beginning of the Bardo of becoming. So, produced by ignorance, there arises, first of all, a bewilderment, and then desire or attachment, and then anger. So the 80 types of thoughts are reactivated. As well, the karmic wind that accompanies your mind and is the mount of your mind as it leaves the body assembles or collects the winds of the 4 elements. First of all, the wind of wind, then the wind of fire, the wind of water, and the wind of earth. At that point, when the 4 elements' winds have been reactivated, you have returned to a state of full-fledged and fully activated bewilderment, like the one you had before you started to die and dissolve. Now the difference here is that while you have all 80 thoughts functioning, and you have the winds of the 4 elements, you don't have a physical body. You don't actually have the 4 elements, merely the subtle winds, which are their bases. Your previous body has been cast aside at this point, and the 5 elements were withdrawn. But through the action of the karmic wind, the winds of the 5 elements have been assembled. So the winds of the 5 elements form the mental body of the bardo or interval of becoming. The mental body of this part of the interval is described in the sutras. It said, with senses complete, it can go anywhere. With senses complete means that even though you may have had 1 or more defective sense organs during your preceding life, and even though the mental body is initially an apparent similitude or replica of your previous physical body, all the senses will seem to work. So if you were sightless, you will still be able to see. If you had difficulty in hearing, you will be able to hear, and so on. As well, you can go anywhere. The bardo being can, at this point, go almost anywhere. But that does not mean exactly what it sounds. The mental body that the bardo being possesses is insubstantial. It has the appearance of the preceding physical body, except that it will seem to be somewhat luminous. It will project its own light. And it has the miraculous ability of freedom of travel or passage, but this is karmic. This is not an ability that results from meditation. It is karmic, which means that it's not so much that you can go wherever you want, it's that nothing can stop you from ending up wherever you think of. Karmic means that as soon as a thought arises to the interval being, the interval thought of a place, the interval being will find him or herself, well, they're neither anymore, but anyway, itself there, right away. So this interval being can pass through any kind of matter, through solid rock. Usually if we want to go around a rock, we have to either climb over it or go around it. This interval being doesn't have to. They'll just shoot right through it. The only place that the interval being cannot go until they actually take birth there is the womb of their future mother. But pretty well every other place they can and will go simply by thinking of it, which means that they're not really in control of where they go. They also have a limited degree of supercognition.
Tene ta te kapsula tanda te gnandu sona ngarang he pa yo hako yo mare ji. Tene ngarang kangba juno longje tenzo la cha yin chembo ngarang yin somne dazung chegre. Tene ngarang chodo nyensen la sobe ngarang dazung ngobo tenzo la longje panda bo tona dezi pangsem da bo da kontron da bo jegre. Song yuare la ta te jitang kang soto suare sena dangwa teni tu manywa ta korara yin ki sheswa tenden da bo je yina ta te ta bu kun tunong jung yuare ngarang she yo pa yo ha ko yo mare teni juzil nong je la da zung yuare chodo nyen ko la so pe ki pe je sena tel tsikba sa wa ta pangsem je wa la so pe yung yuare de yina ya ta ngarang so tang bi chue dong te pa yin bi chen na 대답은 마용 탑시 거기 와래라 대기 쳤나 단단히 제 뭐다 바디 두전도 생각돼 대니 대견도 주노롱지라서 발라요 대점 저기 메지바 다 된소 배 두전도 갈책이 와래라 대니 다 대달도 중가 춘호아 대진다면다 샤기 와래디 이나연 춘호 담은다 샤와티 다 대지 갑깔 야본다보다 갑깔 두부근 춘호 샤그레선 트이그난 송 요아래디 이나연 춘호 샤와 텐졸라 다 춘호데 춘호나 춘호인 버히나 penna tandaga tandi kondu huba yendo mulam tang tene bardu kan tuno ni bote kikwa da ji semjin tuno je shaga yorela tene mulam tela yang ni yang do kamcha je yona bardo tela yang teta bu kamcha je yong yin bicherna de ji 다 두부 있나 장보라 jorto panda bota teni ngoma hiba ina ngo hiba la jorto ba yang yang ten hiton pa ye gisaini ngarange hako anda bo 다 tende yong ge yore ti go ge yore teacher na ngarang so tujondo ten hiba ye de ten go ge yore teni 다 tela jong gong chun bu chi so na yang ngarang so uni pen tong gen ten zo yang ni yang do tujondo kamba ten go ge yore tende song yore la te tujondo ka la sena te hi don poi te top na ti be pedo chimbo yung yore ta tini ta ti ge chuni bardo te hyo don ro te zong ji kong ni char ro yore ta te la ye chi he gu ge bardo la ta chi dang ge ba parti gu chunong te yung yore la tini te ba parti gu chunong te yung du te la tini ta tanda jitang ke chu ngam ban zhe na ni na ngen ju si bi sha su jin sung de ta je wa shi ma ge lu ji na ba da bo ji sha ge re song yo wa de te yin na ya ta nga ran so par du tu du to par du ge lo ju tam chi ge na la ta hyo dan ro tang ge on de je de tang bo par du ge te la ni che je wa na mi ge ba cha da bo ge lu de ti ge no ya ni me la je wa chi mi ge no da bo ya 디 바르다 카르다나라 테 시템보 메바 카브가라 지어 나멘 노 샤와다 카브가라 지어 치멘 노 샤와 샤와나 보다 데 용그레 데 송요레라 데니 다 노르나 다 디캅다나라 가리고기 요레세나 데니 제 춘통 라파기 제스 만롱와 제니 데니 사지 제스 템바 추 제스 템바 겐덴 제스 템바 동화 제스 템바 라 이람제 라 제스 템바 수템 제스 템바 라소바다 양니 양도 데이터보 당가란서 뒤준도 지당게 수템 송하다 짐바 땅와다 데네 다단다 이람젤라 검발라 소바다 근조섬 양시 제스 템발라 소바 예발라 데네 데제 트노 타콘다고 상나야 데라 소르와답나 랑힌키 줄주여 바제레 다단다 첸달레이나 우이 쳔보지 임베츠나 베르나 르니르와라 소바타브지 정나 다티 내가 소르와타발라 데네 줄톱시 히다칼레 카보레테 이나요 바르둔 춘혼다보지 이나 물럼제 노와타브지 임베츠나 우니까 조좀 제스텐테 소르와타브나 야 틴춘노데 jornrojieba 반다보지 임바다 테니 타티 루동노 제라소발라 차긴 쳔보지나 테니 동아 제스 템바테 마 짐바타와라 소바테나 텔라테니 노아텐 jornrojieba 제다 테니 타니 제 차긴 쳔본다볼라 소바지나 수팀 제스 템바신 텔라테니 바차긴 바텐 jornrojieba 제다 테니 테겐도 이람잘라 제스 테나 땡아랑게 무마네 검바 바차라 소바시네 타브노알라 소마다바노아테 타브노알라 소발 jornrojieba 반다보지 cherna ta te tabu ta te tabu ge chunong te kap ndana te ge nang de so ati mengma zani me pa ta ko na chitang ge hiwe ge on de chi de so ra la te ge te temba te khari re sin nga ran so dongwa ta tembe go ne yang si ten hi pa ye ten gu be so de so in sa.
Now, the presentation of the interval of becoming in this text is, as was mentioned, principally a description of what someone with no instruction is going to experience. And it's presented that way in part because finding out what it will be like if we have no training will inspire us to engage in the appropriate training. First of all, the person who arrives at this point of the interval, who reawakens into the interval of becoming, will probably not, for some time, realize that they have died. Not knowing that they're dead, and if you don't know that you're dreaming when you're dreaming, you're likely not to know that you're dead when you're dead. not knowing that they're dead, they will try to return to their home and use their stuff. Of course, they'll be unable to. They'll be unable to use any of this stuff or communicate with anyone. They'll become saddened when they observe their families and friends using their stuff, spending their wealth, living in their home, and they'll become resentful and angry, all because they don't realize that they're dead. Now, we can prevent this by cultivating all of the aspects of practice that will enable us, first of all, to recognize the Bardo as the Bardo, and secondly, by preventing such strong attachment from arising in the first place, through the continuing recollection of impermanence, through ensuring that we do not become too attached to our possessions or wealth. As the person continues to experience the interval of becoming, all sorts of bewildered appearances or hallucinations will arise for them. Some of these are going to be pleasant, some of them are going to be unpleasant. But if you recognize that this is the interval of becoming, and therefore you recognize that all of these hallucinations are just that, then, having previously trained in the recognition and transformation of dreams, you'll know that you can transform them, and you'll do so. You'll be able to transform unpleasant appearances into pleasant ones, impure appearances into pure ones, and so on. So if someone has trained the dream state, they will be able to recognize that they're in the interval of becoming. In order to do this, to start with, we need to cultivate the faculties of mindfulness, alertness, and circumspection throughout the waking state, throughout the day. The things that we need to rely upon at the time of death, we obviously must cultivate now. But in particular, as Jamgalo Drutai wrote, we need to continually and regularly practice so as to reinforce them, those things upon which we wish to rely in the future. Generally speaking, it's taught that the interval of becoming lasts for 49 days. And with regard to the appearances in this period, in the Abhidharma it says that for the duration of the interval, your mental body will have the appearance of your body in the previous life. According to these instructions, you will actually... The expression describing what it says in the Abhidharma is the form of the preceding flesh or embodiment. And Rinpoche says actually the commentaries, it sounds like it means what you look like in the last life. But he says the commentaries on the Abhidharma say it means that preceding means that it's a preceding appearance of the form of the next life. So according to the Abhidharma, throughout the 49 days, your mental body will appear like your body in the following life. According to this text and other texts of this tradition, however, what is taught is that for the first half or the first part of the interval of becoming, your mental body will appear as the body of the preceding life. For the second half or later part of the interval of becoming, it will appear like the body of the next life. And in between, there's kind of a segue where it's oscillating back and forth. So for the first 3 weeks of the 7 weeks, it'll appear one way, for the last 3 another way, and in between go back and forth. During this time, what we principally need to do is, through the cultivation of the 6 recollections, maintain a mindfulness and alertness that enable us not to be caught by the bewildered and bewildering appearances. The 6 recollections are the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, the deity, generosity, and moral discipline. You bring them to mind as appropriate to deal with specific types of bewilderment. For example, during this life, you do things connected with all of these. You keep some degree of moral discipline, you engage in acts of generosity, you meditate on your yidam, and you supplicate and recollect the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The habit of having done these things during this life can be used in the interval of becoming to deal with and transform specific states and appearances of bewilderment. For example, although during this life, if you were about to find yourself crushed by a mountain, it might be too late to pray to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. If this happens in the interval of becoming, it will stop it from happening because it is a bewildered projection rather than a substantial event. In the same way, if in the interval of becoming you find yourself subject to a great attachment, such as, for example, when you look upon your previous possessions and so on, if you recollect your acts of generosity and rejoice in them, that will relieve the attachment. When you find yourself afflicted by fierce desire, if you recollect moral discipline, that will alleviate that. And in general, through the recollection of your yidam, you will be able to transform the impure appearances of the interval of becoming into the pure appearances of the deity. Again, here it is described, the experience of the interval of becoming is described as utter bewilderment because it is describing the experience of someone who has received no instruction and has no training. The purpose of this description is to point out clearly the reason for the training. So we could stop there for this afternoon and conclude with some meditation.
Yeah.